With less than a month left in the legislative session, one of the big cornerstones this year, funding transportation, is missing in action. We've only seen a bullet point framework document released 2 months ago. But this morning, a group of Democratic lawmakers called for the framework to be expanded with more support for safety and public transit.
If we take a purely traditional single occupancy vehicle approach to this, as we've done for most of our history, we are going to fail. What we need to provide is an adequate transportation system, infrastructure for people who want to keep using their own cars for all their travel, and a viable option for folks who might want to do something else. That option has to be reliable and convenient, and that is the challenge of transit.
They got me to court.
Democrats control the legislature, so today's press conference was basically a faction of Dems calling the co-chairs of the Joint Transportation Committee, Democrats Chris Gorsuch and Susan McLean, to take their priorities into account. The baseline framework released 2 months ago is called TRIP, which stands for Transportation Reinvestment Plan. Here are some of the takeaways that you should be aware of. A 20-cent per gallon jump in the gas tax over the span of 6 years, a $66 increase in registration fees, a $90 increase in vehicle title fees, and a new system use fee, which would be a 1% fee the state would collect when you buy a vehicle based on how much it costs, and plans to phase in a pay-per-mile plan, starting with electric vehicles as early as next year. Now, the plan aims to end the state's chronic transportation funding crunch by raising nearly $2 billion in new revenue every budget cycle, most of which would go to the state highway fund that pays for road maintenance. Now, as we told you on Monday, there are also discussions about cutting back on DEQ emissions testing to save some money. But the Democrats who gathered this morning say that plan needs to go further.
Our transportation system is currently underinvested and has been disinvested for the past few decades. So unfortunately, we're going to have a conversation with Oregonians about what they're willing to invest in to ensure that we have roads that are not full of potholes, kids that can get to school safely, and public transit options.
Now, their proposed version, which they call SAFE, modern, affordable, reliable transportation, as in SMART, leaves a lot of the TRIP framework in place, but pushes some of the tax hikes even higher, raising the gas tax by 40 cents, for example, rather than 20. They said the extra revenue would prevent any service cuts at transit agencies statewide, and it would mean much more money for many of the TRIP plan's proposed investments, 5 times as much money for safe routes to school, for example, plus money for new investments like grants and rebates for electric vehicles and chargers.
Right now, transit agencies across the state are looking at cuts to service if they get the funding levels currently included in the TRIP. But we've also known that that was just a first draft, and we expect to see the first bill language to be released soon in the next few days. So we're hopeful that with this kind of advocacy and the strong support we're getting from legislators, that we'll see it in the first bill language.
So once the package is made public, allegedly coming any day now, there will no doubt be plenty of political drama and proposed amendments from Democrats and Republicans. Republicans released their own proposed package framework last month, but it mostly proposed filling the road maintenance funding gap by cutting funding elsewhere rather than raising taxes. Things like moving $146 million from climate initiatives to the state highway fund and $38 million taken from passenger rail service. Now, one of the most eye-catching pieces from the GOP was a proposal to take half the revenue from the public transit payroll tax and give it to truckers for 2 years as a tax break to repay them. Because, according to Republicans, truckers pay a disproportionate share of the tax right now. Now, after 2 years, the entire payroll tax would go to the highway fund. The plan did not mention what the transit agencies were expected to do. But given that TriMet, for example, gets nearly 70% of its funding from that payroll tax, there would no doubt be some service cuts. Will Democrats even entertain that idea? Not likely. But it's not entirely a political show because, as this morning's press conference illustrates, the Democrats aren't totally united. So, if they end up divided over 2 versions of the package, that could give Republicans more leverage. But the next few weeks are going to be a sprint to get the final version hammered out.